Oh, I'm sorry, what? Yep, yep. It's a good day to be here, even though it's rainy and dark. It's nice. All right, so what have you guys been studying recently? Because I haven't been here, so yeah. So I don't have any context beyond what I've studied. Anybody remember? David. Okay. Yep. David and his life and all that's been going on and the end of David's life, right? Um, how does David die? What happens as he gets older? What's the situation? He dies young and in battle, right? No. He's very old, right? He's so old. I always, when I was a kid, we read through this. When I was really young, we did this. We read through the Bible in a year, and this was the part that really stuck out to me as a kid. It was like he was so old that they could not get him warm, and I was like, huh, I didn't know that. It's just interesting. But yeah, they covered him with blankets. They set him in front of the fire, and he couldn't get warm at all, right? He was just constantly cold. My grandfather's kind of like that right now, so. So yeah, constantly cold, right? Who succeeds him? Solomon, who is not his oldest son, right? His oldest son at the moment, well, his oldest son tried to take over at one point. That was one of the rebellions that David had to quell. David didn't like it, but David had to do it. And then his next oldest son tries to take the throne, right? He gathers some of the priests and he takes them to a particular place and in essence has a big coronation party and says, ha, look, I'm the king now. David is, or Bathsheba and Nathan the prophet go to David and they say, hey, you should not let this happen. You should make Solomon king. Solomon's made king, right? And then we have the very beginning of Solomon's reign. So what happened? What was some of the very first things that Solomon did? Yeah, he took care of business, right? Yeah. David left him with a couple instructions like, I told these enemies that I wouldn't kill them, but you're not me, so you should kill them, right? And then Solomon did just that. He goes through and kills David's enemies, some political opponents. So today we're going to be in 1 Kings chapter 3, which is the very kind of, well, it's not the very beginning, but it's the very next actions of Solomon, kind of the early years of his reign. So I wanted to kind of step back here, kind of look at what the purpose of Kings and Samuel is, okay, the books in general. So 1st, 2nd Samuel are the early years of Israel, and then leading up to King David, and then all of King David's reign, right? We spent probably a long time in David. There was a lot of David, right? There's not as much about any other king. They get shorter progressively as we go on, okay? So the purpose of 1st and 2nd Samuel is to show the early years of the monarchy and how they had some downfalls, but they were relatively good for the most part, right? And then Kings, what do you guys think the purpose of Kings is? That's kind of a vague question, so I'm trying my best to frame what I'm asking here. Anybody have an idea? Do I need to be a little bit more specific? The people wanted a king, but how'd that turn out? Not very good, exactly. That's the whole point. The point of Kings is to show the decline of the monarchy, right? So we started out on kind of this high note, and it was a little rocky, but we finally got to an okay place. David was like, he wasn't great, but he was good. He had oh my goodness, he was a man after God's own heart. I forgot the phrase for a second. He was a man after God's own heart, right? And then we have his son Solomon, and 1 Kings chapters 1 through 11, it's the continuation of Samuel, so it picks up right where Samuel left off. 1 Kings 1 through 11 is the reign of Solomon, and then immediately after, we have 12 through 16, that's where Israel splits, because we have a lot of problems with the monarchy. 1 Kings 17 through 2 Kings 8 is about the kings have gone really wrong, and God sends a bunch of prophets going, hey, you're going really wrong. And the kings aren't very listening. They're not listening very much. And then 9 through 17, we have the lead up to the exile. And then 18 through 25 of 2 Kings is the exile of Israel. So in essence, what this is doing is what I like to think of it as is this is showing us why Jesus was necessary, right? Which is kind of cool. Like if you look at this, the whole point of this is a lot of background, right, for Jesus. That's the point. Is we're watching this monarchy and we're like, you wanted a king, it's not working out for you, nothing's going well, here's why all this stuff happened, and then at the end, this tragedy, everybody gets taken out of Israel and spread everywhere, nobody's home, everybody's having all these problems. That's why Jesus is necessary. Okay, so, but I just wanted to kind of give that context for kings as we're getting into it so we don't, like, miss the larger point here. Because sometimes, I know for me at least, it gets a little easy when we're reading like Kings and Samuel and go, why are we studying this? It's just old history, right? Old news, ancient history, nobody wants to listen to this. The reason that we're doing it is because this is the lead up to Jesus, okay? All right. So we're going to be in 1 Kings chapter 1. There's about 2 sections of this. The first 15 verses of the first section, and then second section is going to be 16 through 28. So could I get somebody to read 3 verses? And we're going to read through 15. So I need 5 people to read 3 verses, I guess. Yep, go ahead. 1 through 3. Okay, could I get somebody else to read 4 through 6? Yep. Somebody for 7 through 9. Let's go back to this side of the room. Yep, go ahead. And 10 through 12, back on this side of the room. Anybody? Everybody is assiduously avoiding contact with the eyes, yeah? 10 through 12, yep. Okay, and 13 through 15. Okay. So, just recap for me what happened. In your own words, what happened? Solomon asked for wisdom. Okay. Is that anything before that? Anything after that? Is that a good summary? We're good? The part that stood out to me was Solomon's sacrificing, right? That's the first part. So Solomon goes to sacrifice, right? Where does he go? The high places. He goes to the high places. Okay. So this is the first thing that kind of confused me, right? So does anybody know what they're talking about when they say the high places? Does that ring any bells? Anybody remember? What did you say? Foreign gods, okay? So later in the story, okay, well, and sometimes earlier in the story too, it's a pagan concept, right, the high places. The idea is, in order to get closer to God or the gods or fill in the blank, you had to get high up. It's like, oh, okay, well, clearly you're closer to God on a mountain than you are on the sea, right? Because God's up there, and so you got to go up, right? And so that's the idea. Is these high places are the best places to contact God, okay? So that's kind of the idea here. Later on, like I said, it's almost exclusively foreign gods that they're talking about. So when they say the high places, they're talking almost exclusively about foreign gods. Here, in this instance, it appears, and we can discuss this if you guys want, it appears that they're not sacrificing to foreign gods, but rather that they are sacrificing to Yahweh in high places, okay? So that's the first thing that we want to kind of clear up. Does that make sense to everybody? You good with that? Challenges? Okay, all right. So what's happening is they're sacrificing to Yahweh in the high places. And this is because, why? Verse 2. The temple hadn't been built yet. So what's happening here is the author of Kings is kind of telling us, okay, everything's great, and Solomon's doing great, except there's kind of a couple problems to start with in the first place. So let's look back at, I lost where it was. Leviticus 17:9 real fast. Well, hold on a second. We'll back up a little bit. So Leviticus 17. Yeah, it's a lot, but I think I want to read most of this so that we kind of get a context. Leviticus 17. And the Lord spoke to Moses, verse 1, saying, "Speak to Aaron, to his sons, and to all the children of Israel, and say to them, This is the thing which the Lord has commanded, saying, Whatever man of the house of Israel who kills an ox or lamb or goat in the camp, or who kills it outside the camp, and does not bring it to the door of the tabernacle of meeting, to offer an offering to the Lord before the tabernacle of the Lord, the guilt of the bloodshed shall be imputed to that man. He has shed blood, and that man shall be cut off from among his people." So do we remember part of what defines the tabernacle, right, is the Ark of the Covenant. The Ark of the Covenant is in the tabernacle. The tabernacle houses the Ark of the Covenant, okay? That's what makes them both there. All right, where's the Ark? Do we remember? Oh, wait. The Holy of Holies, right, but that's in the temple. Well, I mean, it's in the tabernacle also. There's a Holy of Holies separation. I guess what I mean is, in Israel, in 1 Kings 3, at the moment, where's the ark? Do we remember? There's a big procession. A couple people died. It was a bit of a tragic tale. Remember the ox stumbled, and they weren't supposed to be carrying an ox cart in the first place, and somebody touched it, and they died, right? And then David left it somewhere, and then a couple years later, he's like, I really should finish that. And so he comes back, grabs the Ark of the Covenant, and brings it. That's okay. All right. Let's see if we can find it real fast. I'm pretty sure it's in 2 Samuel, right? This will be a good exercise in memory here. Anybody have any more detailed instructions? 2 Samuel. Yeah? In Jerusalem? Right. Yes. So it's in Jerusalem, right? So the Ark of the Covenant was brought to Jerusalem. So where are they supposed to be sacrificing? In front of the tabernacle, right? In Jerusalem. So they're supposed to be coming to Jerusalem, all right? But they're not. They're meeting at these high places all over Israel. Now, what's really strange, at least to me, is here in 1 Kings 3, that doesn't really seem, it seems like it's not perfect, but not bad either, okay? It's not like the people sinned, right? I mean, later on, we'll see that. It's the people turned their hearts away from God. The people were living in evil, right? And they sacrificed on the high places. Here it's just kind of like, well, the temple of the Lord hasn't been built, so they sacrificed on the high places. I wrestle with this one, and I'm still wrestling a little bit with this one. It doesn't seem like it's bad to me. What are you guys thinking? Does anybody have any thoughts on this? Is what's going on in Israel a bad thing, or is it kind of an acceptable error? Does that make any sense? Yeah? Right. Okay. Well, not all of them are. So, and we look at this, right? So where does Solomon go to sacrifice? Solomon goes to Gibeon, right? Which is the high place of the high places, which is near to Jerusalem, but it's north. It's like up a little ways north, right? But the idea is that the people overall, like all the people, were sacrificing in the high places. So I know this is we're kind of in the weeds here, but stick with me. So I wanted to look at Judges. We're going to jump again. Judges 6:26. So, the judges, before or after the kings? Before the kings, right? Who were the judges? Not all their names, but sorry. We still have, I can do it if we want to, but we're not going to. Okay, not all the names. Rather, what was a judge? What was it, yeah? Yep. Men and women who were appointed by God as leaders, right, of Israel in times of struggle to lead them back to God when they had fallen away. So in Judges chapter 6, we're talking about Gideon, not Gibeon, Gideon, right? The only reason I say that is because that threw me for a minute, because I guess was a little minorly dyslexic and was like, isn't this the same place that Solomon's going? No, very different. Different places, different people. But here in Judges chapter 6, this is the raising of Gideon, the judge, okay? And we're looking, so I want to read a couple select verses through here. Verse 11. Now the angel of the Lord came and sat under the terebinth tree, which was in Ophrah, which belonged to Joash the Abiezrite, while his son Gideon threshed wheat in the winepress in order to hide it from the Midianites who were oppressing the Israelites at this time. So the Midianites were the big enemies at the moment. And the angel of the Lord appeared to him and said to him, "The Lord is with you, you mighty man of valor." Gideon said to him, "O my Lord, the Lord is with us. Why then has this all happened to us?" And he discusses with the angel for a little while. In essence, the angel leaves him with some discussions, or with some instructions. I said discussions. Instructions. So Gideon in verse 19, so Gideon went in and prepared a young goat and unleavened bread and an ephah of flour. The meat he put in a basket, and he put the broth in a pot, and he brought them out to him under the terebinth tree and presented them. The angel of God said to him, "Take the meat, the unleavened bread, lay them on this rock, and pour out the broth." And he did so. Then the angel of the Lord put out the end of his staff that was in his hand and touched the meat and the unleavened bread, and fire rose out of the rock and consumed the meat and the unleavened bread. And the angel of the Lord departed out of his sight. Gideon knows that this is an angel now. And then the instructions are this, verse 25. Now it came to pass the same night that the Lord said to him, take your father's young bull, the second bull of 7 years old, tear down the altar of Baal that your father has, and cut down the wooden image that is beside it, and build an altar to the Lord your God on top of this rock in the proper arrangement, and make the second bull and offer a burnt sacrifice with the wood of the image which you shall cut down. So we have here a high place that Gideon, because it's offering to Baal. Baal is worshipped in the high places. And Gideon is commanded to destroy the altar of Baal and instead build what? An altar to God, to Yahweh, right? So here we have God commanding Gideon to build an altar in a high place. And this is after the Leviticus, which we were reading, that says don't sacrifice anywhere other than the tabernacle. And it's before the temple was built. And so we have this situation where God has commanded somebody to build an altar in the high place. And we have other places where this happens, right? Like Moses did this a lot. Moses would build altars in the wilderness. Several of the judges would build altars in the high places or in the wilderness. Even later on, once we read about David and some of the better kings, they tear down the high places, and then what do? Build altars to the Lord instead, right? So I'm asking because I'm not really sure what is going on in this situation. Is it a bad thing that they're sacrificing in the high places? Is it not a bad thing? What do we think? Anybody thoughts? Yeah. Yeah. So sometimes God seems to hold them to really strict standards, like with touching the ark, right? Well, the oxen were falling. Yeah, but I told you not to touch it. And so the guy dies, right, because he touched the ark. And then other times it's like, well, you can build an altar in the high place. I told you to do that, right? Even though I said don't sacrifice anywhere other than the tabernacle, right? You can build an altar in the high place. I agree, and it confuses me too, and I'm kind of curious what many of you who are older and wiser than I am say about this. Yeah. Yeah. Especially in 1 Kings 3, right? It doesn't seem like God's saying anything about it, so it doesn't seem like it's a problem. I don't know. I'm getting a couple blank stares. Is everybody okay with this and I'm not? That's okay if we are. It's okay if we are. Sometimes I get stuck in like loops and I look at this and I get too deep into it and go, something's not right. And maybe I'm missing the forest through the trees. Is that true? Are people having problems with this? Anybody see an issue here? Right. Yeah. Yeah. Well, and what really gets me about this is what's the result? So he goes to this high place and he sacrifices, and what happens? Yeah, God comes to him and says, hey, what do you want? Right? How many of us, if God comes to you, right? Somebody pointed this out when I was studying. They're like, isn't this a fantastic question? Isn't this what everybody wants to have happen? God just shows up one day. He goes, hey, what do you want? I'll give you anything. Just, what do you want? Right? That's crazy. And to be doing that, if he's disobeying God by sacrificing on the high places, doesn't really seem to be making any sense to me. Yeah. Right. Right.
Which is more important, what you do, where you do it, why you do it, or that you do it?
Mm. Yep. Yep. Which is what I actually wanted to point out also. So, one second, we'll get back to this conversation. But later on, right, we have the same thing happening. Later on, oh my goodness, I forgot their name. Samaritans. The Samaritans, right, they're worshiping in a high place. That's what it is. It's the mountain, right? But that's the literal, that's what the high place is. So the Samaritans are worshiping on the high places, and that's anathema, right? Okay. I'm sorry, you had your hand up before, Dad.
So Solomon is worshiping in a high place, but what do we know Solomon does in Jerusalem at the end? He builds the temple, right?
Mm-hmm.
So it's interesting, Mark, you said on a case-by-case basis, which I think is true, but then also God directs Solomon, okay, now that we've got me back in line, now let's go back to what I've been trying to get you to do, right? Here's my house, here's my holy of holies.
Yep.
Sacrifice here. So it's interesting to note that there are times that this happens, but God still brings people back.
Yeah.
Or at least attempts to bring people back to where he wants them. And I think it's interesting with the woman at the well, because Christ was telling the perfect way to worship. And those were the things that were escaping everybody, and he was like, this is where it's going to be perfect, complete.
Right. Yes, go ahead.
Well, when you think about it, he had really good intentions because he loved the Lord.
Right.
He loved him. And I think out of mercy, because God knew his heart.
Yeah.
Just like the woman at the well, God knew that's not the life she really wanted. And then he tells her what he wants from her. And that's what she does to turn around. Sometimes we struggle to know really what is God's will for us.
Yep.
We know because we have the scripture. They didn't have anything. They just had guidance from other people. But like you said, he built the temple and everything. But in the end, we see where he went.
Yes.
We
Yeah.
know how bad he turned out.
Yeah.
All the goodness that God gave him, even with that, he kind of went astray. But it is a heart condition.
Right.
We have to keep our heart lined up with God.
Yes, it's about intent, right? Which goes back to your question: what's more important? Why, what, where, when, or how, right? And it appears like what God is at least attempting to say, in my opinion, is that the why is more important than the how, even though the how is not unimportant, right? Because God's intent is still what? To get them back. He's going to Solomon, meeting him where he's at, and then saying, okay, but you need to come back with me, please. Like, don't stay where you're at. Like, you need to move forward and get better, okay? Any more comments on that? Yeah, in Jerusalem. Yep, the highest place in Jerusalem. Yep. And so we even see that in this story, okay? Because so verses 1 through 5, right? They're in Gibeon. Sorry, I'm trying to get the verse here. And then in verse 15, what happens? Solomon awakes. It's been a dream. He comes to Jerusalem, stands before the ark, right, which is the tabernacle, or it's in the tabernacle. He stands before the ark, and he offers burnt offerings, offers peace offerings, and makes a feast. So Solomon comes back. He's like, oh, yeah, I really should be listening to that. And he comes back and does the right thing, right? And so I think, there's a lot of good that we can take from this. So the first thing is, what does this mean for us? What does this show us about God here, right? God's meeting us where we're at sometimes. So it's not that the why is unimportant, or not that the how is unimportant, right? But God meets us where we're at, recognizes our weaknesses, we're not perfect, and he does have the grace, right? Just like what Elaine was saying. We have the grace, or he has the grace to come meet us where we're at and bring us forward, okay? Any other comments about that in particular? Right. Yes, exactly. Because, what does Jesus point out about the law later on, right? The whole point of the law was to change you inwardly through outward actions, right? The whole point of the law was, go make these sacrifices, because what I want you to do is I want you to make these sacrifices and come to me in a sacrificial mindset, right? Circumcision of the heart, okay? That was the whole point, was the idea that going through the law, right, it should change your inward self, and it didn't. And that's what Jesus is coming through to when Jesus comes, right, and he says, you guys say these things, you're not supposed to murder, but you guys follow the letter of the law, and you don't let it do anything to you, which was the whole point. The whole point of the law was this should make you not want to be angry at your neighbor. This should make you want to take in the poor and the helpless. You shouldn't just be like, oh, I'm going to let you feed off the grains of my field because the law says. The whole point was, yeah, that's what the law is. But if you're really following the law, then you would take those people in and feed them, right? And that was the point. Okay, anyways, I'm sorry. Dad, I think you had one more comment? Okay, you're done. All right, so here we go. 1 Kings 3, right? Another thing this kind of does real fast is this foreshadows a little bit, right? So the Israelites, we said before, they end up falling away. They end up going back to the old Canaanite gods and worshiping on the high places. And this kind of shows, even when they were worshiping God, there were still these little, worms of I suppose, dissent, right? Of unfaithfulness is probably a better word, that had already kind of gotten their way in. They weren't doing what they were supposed to do, and they were using excuses. Well, the temple isn't built. Yeah, but the tabernacle's there. Well, yeah, I guess. And kind of moving forward. So even though they were doing the right things, they weren't doing them, or even though they were having the right intent, they weren't necessarily doing it the right way, and that trips them in the future, okay? All right. Time are we at? So, Solomon asks for wisdom. There's a couple interesting things here that I just wanted to point out. The first thing here is what Solomon actually asks for, right? So, verse 9, therefore, give to your servant an understanding heart to judge your people. Okay? So, the word there that's used, which I think is really interesting, the word that's used for heart, it doesn't necessarily just mean give me the right feelings, right? Or give me the right attitude. So the heart in this sense refers to the whole being, and actually sometimes even as the center of reason. So what it's saying is don't only give me understanding feeling, right? Give me understanding intuition. Give me the ability to understand everything about a situation, about these whole situations. So that I can judge the people rightly. And then something else here he says in verse 9, so he says, understanding heart to judge your people, that I may discern between good and evil. And does that ring any bells for anybody? Discern between good and evil? Does anybody think of another place in Scripture where we're talking about the knowledge of good and evil? The Garden of Evil, or the Garden of Eden. The Garden of Eden, right? The Garden of Evil. The Garden of Eden, okay? So pay close attention in the upcoming chapters, okay? Because there's a lot of Garden of Eden imagery. And this is the first thing, right? So God says, don't eat of the knowledge of the tree of, or don't eat of the fruit of the knowledge of the tree of the knowledge of good and evil, right? Okay, that always trips me up. Don't eat of that, but then they do and they fall, right? And here we have Solomon coming back and saying, okay, the world is broken, there are problems. Please give me the ability to discern between good and evil, right? And later on in the building of the temple, there's going to be a section coming up that I know whoever teaches, and because I'm saying this, it's probably going to be me, is not going to be very happy about it because it's just in essence like a list of it's a shopping list, right? It's like, and anyways, they bought this many timbers from this place, and then they bought this much gold, and they used that in this construction, and there was a stone that was cut, and it's like, why are we talking about this? But part of the reason that you talk about it is because of the imagery that's used, and there's a lot of Garden of Eden imagery in that, in the types that are used, right, in the way that it's constructed, and the things that they're made to look like. There's a lot of fruit trees in the temple, right? There's a lot of that kind of imagery, and so there's a lot of Garden of Eden imagery, and this is kind of where it starts out, is Solomon asking for the knowledge of good and evil. And then the end of the chapter, the last bit here, is an example of the wisdom that Solomon was given, okay? I think most of us are pretty familiar with this. I'm going to go ahead and read it. Verse 16. Well, before I do that, is there any other parts about 1 through 15 that anybody wants to talk about? I know I've kind of killed the horse and then beat it to death, but anybody else got a thing? Anything else? Yes. Right. God was very pleased with what he had asked for. Yes. Which is also really interesting, right? Because what does this say for us when I believe it's James, like Ruth was saying, I believe it's James, right? Ask for wisdom and it will be given to you, right? Don't be afraid to ask because God will give liberally, right? And that's so cool. God is pleased with Solomon for asking this. And then later on, it's like, just ask. Why don't you people ask? Just ask. I will give it to you, right? Yeah, go ahead. Yeah. Isn't that really interesting? And so I really like Ecclesiastes. I don't know about the rest of you. If you get the chance to read Ecclesiastes, it's very, very interesting. And one of the themes is we assume that it's Solomon who's the writer, or at least somebody who's writing for Solomon, about Solomon. And one of the themes throughout is like, I've done all of this stuff, and I know what was important. And that was the end, right? And it wasn't what I did. Okay. So verse 15, verse 16. Now 2 women who were harlots came to the king and stood before him. And one woman said, "O my lord, this woman and I dwell in the same house, and I gave birth while she was in the house. Then it happened, the 3rd day after I had given birth, that this woman also gave birth. And we were together. No one was with us in the house except the 2 of us in the house. And this woman's son died in the night because she lay on him. So she arose in the middle of the night and took my son from my side while your maidservant slept, and laid him in her bosom, and laid her dead child in my bosom. And when I arose in the morning to nurse my son, there he was, dead. But when I had examined him in the morning, indeed he was not my son whom I had born. Then the other woman said, No, but the living one is my son, and the dead one is your son. And the first woman said, No, but the dead one is your son, and the living one is my son. Thus they spoke before the king. And the king said, The one says, This is my son who lives, and your son is the dead one. And the other one says, No, but your son is the dead one, and my son is the living one. Then the king said, Bring me a sword. So they brought a sword before the king. And the king said, Divide the living child in 2, and give half to one and half to the other. Then the woman whose son was living spoke to the king, for she yearned with compassion for her son. And she said, O my lord, give her the living child, and by no means kill him. But the other said, Let him be neither mine nor yours, but divide him. So the king answered and said, Give the first woman the living child, and by no means kill him. She is his mother. And all Israel heard of the judgment which the king had rendered, and they feared the king, for they saw that the wisdom of God was in him to administer justice. I know we're past time, so I just wanted to make a quick observation. Isn't it interesting who is chosen for the example of Solomon's judgment, right? It's not two tribal leaders. It's not the priests. It's not, some high-in-status person. It's two prostitutes. And they are chosen as an example of what justice is when Solomon gives it to them, showing us that justice is not just for the people who are high and clean and mighty, right? But it's also, and maybe especially, for the people who are lowly and in need of it most, right? All right, thank you all for your attention. I appreciate your answers.